Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Michael Asbury, and I am the founder and senior consultant of Elevate Coaching and Consulting. I've got a background in computational physics and mathematics, as well as actuarial science, and I was a machine tool design engineer for my first job out of college, and then I was a design engineer, then a simulation engineer, and then I got into continuous improvement as a continuous improvement engineer. Then I became a lean operations and installation practices coach, followed by a quality and continuous improvement manager, followed by the corporate continuous improvement manager. And by then, I had worked my way up to being responsible for 24 facilities around the United States. And so it was very important for me to prioritize my time as well as my resources. I was operating with a very small team of 3 employees, and I was very blessed to have very talented and very driven employees working with me, considering the amount of responsibility that we had. And so, what I'd like to share with you today is charting your roadmap to efficacy. Okay, so I'm going to tie in TLS with what you can do to go from where you're currently at to having a company that's very solid and profitable and growing with stable growth. Okay, so um, also, I am a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and a certified TOC Jonah from the TOC International Certification Organization. So this is the fourth part of our four webinar series. And the first one we talked about how you can apply TLS, which is the theory of constraints, and Lean Six Sigma to help make a strong comeback during this challenging economic situation that we're in. And then I went over the basics of TLS. And then I introduced the chain of solutions, which is just a way that helped me to be able to prioritize where we could make improvements to make the most impact. Okay, in the right series, in the right sequence. So what we're wanting to do is go from um, everybody working on various things, but not necessarily going in the same direction, to a very aligned organization that has very strategic and tactical plan that is very effective and efficient in driving the results that they're trying to get. Okay, so for those of you that have been with me for the previous um, webinars, this is review. But basically, we're looking at applying TLS to stabilize, enhance, and increase the flow through our organizations. So we have to assess where we're at, make a plan to get to where we're going, and then execute it. So we need to understand the drivers and inhibitors of our demand, our supplies, our supply, and our capacities. Okay, so for a lot of companies, what recently happened is their sales were generally increasing over the last several years, and we had a pretty strong economy. And when the pandemic hit, we had a series of events where many companies lost the sales demand for their organization. And considering that in organizations there's a lot of overhead, typically, although they've done what they can to reduce their expenses, typically they can't reduce it enough to stay profitable in this given situation. So their profit has dropped below the line. So they've gone from some degree of profitability, hopefully, to some degree of unprofitability. Okay. So we are at this point trying to assess what can be done to get more sales through with the resources that they have in place, with less defects and downtime and delays and scrap and rework, so that the expenses are actually come down some and we can get some more throughput through the organization and get us back to a level of profitability that can match where it was before. Then we go through a coordinated ramp up phase where, as we bring resources back and the sales demand comes back, We want to coordinate that in a way that we keep the blue line in the positive. Okay. Then we can continue to apply TLS and continue to scale up our sales and demand while not growing our expenses at the same rate. So this gives us the opportunity to hopefully come out of this situation at a higher level of profitability than we were when we started before this happened. So this can be done if organizations understand the tools and methodologies and the sequence in which they can make improvements. Okay, it's very doable. So TLS is the combination of theory of constraints plus Lean Six Sigma. From the theory of constraints, we have identifying and defining our goals, focusing on constraints, using buffer management and strategic planning, and it's very throughput driven. So we're focused on the flow and making improvements that allow us to get more through the organization. With Lean, it's very customer value focused. There's a set of waste identification and reduction tools. We get the employees highly engaged, and we produce based on what we can sell to the customer. So based on customer demand, with Six Sigma, we have a team-oriented, structured problem-solving approach with data-driven improvements, and it's focused on improving the effectiveness and efficiency of the processes. And there are a set of variation identification and reduction tools. So by combining them, we have a goal-driven, focused, collaborative, data-driven, obstacle removing, and value increasing methodology. Okay. And with that, we get all these fun tools. We get the core tools of Lean, the core tools of TOC, and many, many tools of Six Sigma. Okay. So now I'm going to briefly review the Ultimate Improvement Cycle by Bob Sproull. And this is some very good reference material for those of you that want to become more familiar with TLS. And there's another good book that I would highly recommend called Velocity by D. Jacobs and Jeff Cox. And so with the Ultimate Improvement Cycle, you can see that we've got three of constraints at the center with its 5 focusing steps to help us prioritize what we can focus on for our projects to make the most impact. The next level is Lean, where we identify value, make it flow, pull to customer demand, and pursue perfection. And then on the outside, we have the DMAIC process of Six Sigma. Okay, so if we start at the 12 o'clock position, we get a complete picture of how the system works. Okay, we have knowledge of waste, we have knowledge of variation and defects. We know, and we also know where the inventory is at and our potential core problems. Then we come up with a coherent plan to improve our system capacity and flow. So we start with getting our constraint organized and minimizing the waste there. Then we move on to controlling the constraint and reducing the variation. Then we come up with a plan to synchronize with the rest of the system. So we come up with, at this point, we get to where the rest of the system is coordinated with the constraint. And then we start to optimize our buffers. The more stable we become, the less work in process inventory we need to protect the flow. Okay. So then we come up with a coherent sustainment plan so that we can optimize our control and our capabilities. So here we gain insight into what capacity would it give us the highest ROI on elevating or purchasing additional capacity. So we can use throughput accounting to make those critical decisions. And we also implement additional controls to make sure that we sustain our gains. Okay. And then basically we're ready for another cycle. We see what has changed and what we need to do to go to the next level. All right. So the phases of the chain of solutions are discover, survey, explore, plant, harvest, and expand. And this chain of solutions is something that is a subset of the roadmap to efficacy. And this is built upon the ultimate improvement cycle. So, and then we go to repeat here. So we're assessing our demand, and our supply, defining the value and the goals, identifying our target for where we should be focusing on in terms of which product families, if we improve the flow, will we make the most additional impact on the organization's profitability. So we need to know the product families to focus on, as well as which facilities and departments to focus on. So once we've narrowed it down some, then we go into the survey phase where we measure, analyze, and prioritize what we should be improving. So we get a deep understanding of how things work and what we should change with this. Then we explore, so we identify and select potential solutions, and we're basically going from ideas to concepts that we would like to try and prioritizing them. So with the plant phase, we're planning and testing those potential solutions and improving them to the point where we are ready to implement them and we want them to be rolled out and sustained. So the harvesting is implementing those validated solutions and the controls to make those the new way of doing things. So the change management process is built into the harvesting. Okay. Then we expand. So we replicate our solution across the rest of the product family because sometimes a product family flows through multiple facilities, right? And some of those are in different regions and they have a different proportion of the actual product mix, right? So then once we get to here, we go back to one and see if there's another product family we should be focusing on or what we should be looking at for all the possible solutions we could implement in what sequence for the next. So you can think of this as a way to coordinate your project portfolio of improvements. Okay. So now we're going to get into the roadmap to efficacy. And basically, we're going from assessing where we're at to we have very profitable and stable growth. Okay. So let's start with the basics here. What's efficacy? It is the ability to produce the desired result or the power to produce an effect. So basically, this is our organization doing what it was created to do in the first place, right? So in terms of business, the results or effects that we desire are typically to make money now as well as in the future. So this in the future part helps us to avoid short-term decision making that sacrifices the future, right? Likewise, we want to satisfy our stakeholders now and in the future. This also applies to nonprofits, except rather than increasing the money that they're trying to make, they want to make sure they have enough money to fund the programs and projects that they have in place to achieve whatever it is they're created for. Okay. So stakeholders are the owners, the customers, the employees, the suppliers, and then secondary stakeholders may be the communities and families of these stakeholders. Okay. All right. So the roadmap to efficacy, there's about 9 phases. A few of them are somewhat repetitive. So the first one's assess, then we stabilize, then we hit our constraints with some quick improvements, then we enhance the flow throughout the rest of the organization, then we reassess, which is very similar to assess. Okay, so this is almost like a second cycle here. So then we strengthen and coordinate. Then we go to a next level of analysis, expand our offerings, and then we approach scalable growth here. So with assess, we're assessing our value chain and identifying key deterrents, which are the disruptions and distractions that keep us from focusing on what's more important. They're important because they're disrupting and distracting us, not because they help us to achieve more if we want of what we want. Okay, so we stabilize by eliminating the targeted defects, downtime, and delays that are the primary deterrents, which allows our leadership to focus on the important things that will actually gain us more of the goal. Okay, so our constraint quick hits are unlock and harnessing the hidden capacity of our initial constraints throughout our value chain. and we're primarily looking internally at this point. So next we execute the chain of solutions, which we talked about yesterday, across the additional internal operations beyond just focusing on the constraints. Then we reassess the value chain and identify the key disruptions and distractions that we have now. Since we've eliminated some and we've increased the flow, we may be discovering that other things are amplified at this point. Okay, so by changing our performance, we have affected the factors that affect us. Okay. So the next level is we strengthen and coordinate, which means we're executing the chain of solutions internally as well as coordinating it with our value chain partners so that as we grow and get more throughput through our organization, they can keep up and support us so that we can supply the demand all the way to the end customers for the increased volume that we are handling now. Okay, so then we go to a next level analysis where we're analyzing opportunities for how can we better apply our value chain strengths with redesigning some of our existing products as well as designing new solutions that we can offer to the markets that complement our existing market. Okay, so then we expand our offerings. We develop and market the next level solutions with our high performance value chain. So we're saying, what else can we produce and deliver to our existing customers as well as other ones within our supply and distribution channels that fit what we know how to do well. Then we go into the scalable growth where we penetrate and grow our market share for our core and our new offerings. Okay, so we've got highly profitable core products as well as very desirable and profitable new offerings at this point. So the stages to efficacy, we've got assess. So we're looking at our goals and current performance, our external conditions and factors, and what are the major deterrents keeping us from focusing on what we actually want to focus on. Then we go to stabilize, where we eliminate the top 3 deterrents. So this could be defects, downtime, or delays, but it's whatever is the things that keep us in firefighting mode. So you can imagine that we have a few ultimate improvement cycles here going on. So we're going after the constraints, we're stabilizing them, we're coordinating, and we are controlling that so that we can sustain it. So these don't sneak back up on us and distract us more in the future. Okay. Then we move into the constraint quick hits where we're unlocking and harvesting our low-hanging fruit at our constraints. So we're identifying, prioritizing, and harvesting our potential here. And there are several common TLS tools between Lean and Six Sigma and TOC where, if you spend some time and analyze your constraint, there's some quick wins here where you can rapidly increase your throughput. Okay, so now we move on to enhancing our flow. So we're applying the chain of solutions internally with sequenced improvements based on their impact across a product family or the top 3 product families. And as we're doing this, we are giving TLS training through experiential learning experiences to project teams. Okay, then we need to reassess because by this point, things may have changed. There will be, this may be 3 to 6 months, maybe even 9 months since we did our first assessment. So we need to review our goals and value chain performance. And this time we're taking a little deeper dive into the value chain performance because if we've gone through these phases, we're going to be producing at a higher volume. Okay, so some of them may be struggling to keep up. All right, imagine that you're producing now at 20 to 40% more by this point. Okay, if you have suppliers or distribution channels that are already working 6 or 7 days a week on all their shifts, before they get to this, they may be struggling to keep up. So at this point, we want to identify those external conditions and factors and potential constraints And once again, we want to look at our major deterrents that are keeping us from um, focusing on what we want to focus on. So now we're going to strengthen and coordinate both internally as well as externally with our chain of solutions. So we've got sequenced improvements across the product families internally as well as in the value chain. And at this point, we should be developing our TLS program internally so that as we make improvements in additional target areas, we are training the people and the project teams there, as well as now we're managing an improvement project portfolio internally as well as with our supply chain and distribution and logistics partners. So then we go on to the next level analysis. When we're in the enhance flow phase or we're in within our strengthen and coordinate phase, you can imagine going through multiple phases of um, you know, I like to use 20% improvement increments. So we come up with a plan to get the next 20%, then the next 20%, and so on. So you could have multiple cycles or phases within these stages. So then we get to next level analysis. This is where we look at our value chain strengths and identify additional desirable markets that we may want to participate in. And we prioritize our product redesign. We can take time and materials out of our existing designs at this point, okay, as well as prioritizing new products that we can offer that fit our capabilities. So then we expand our offerings by redesigning the products so that we have higher margins, as well as designing new high margin products that we can offer. And we set up our processes for additional flexible ramp up. And then we introduce those new products to the market. And then finally, we're to the scalable growth where we can penetrate and grow market share. We can execute our growth plan, and we're maximizing our ROI and our IRR. So return on investment, internal rate of return with each additional project that we do where we're increasing our capacity. So we can do this with organic growth as well as inorganic growth in parallel at this phase, because it should be more stable, and we've got a system in place now where we're overcoming the deterrents as they're popping up. So that helps us to keep our stability. Okay. So I'm going to take a little deeper dive into the assess phase. This is stage one. This is where we're preparing for rapid internal improvement. Okay. So we start with, what do we actually want to achieve? Why do we want to achieve that? What will it be like if it's achieved? So this helps to rally the troops to join our cause here. Okay. And so the other thing we need to know is, where are we now versus where we want to go? So we need to take a look at our internal processes in our value chain and look at the current performance and capability of them. Then we need to also take into consideration our external conditions, which is very, very important right now, right? It's always important, but right now it's extremely important. We can look at the market trends. What are the supply and demand drivers? What are the inhibitors and all of those? Then we can also look at our major market segments served, our key customers, our key competitors, our key suppliers, also, as well as the distribution and logistics. We can also look at our potential markets, desired customers, potential suppliers, and potential competitors, right? And it's also very good to know what is out there. Who is doing what the best and how do they do it? Is there anything that is in public knowledge that it's okay for us to do that someone else is doing and it takes us up a level? Whether it's product design, processes, management methods, like TLS, not everybody knows about that, right? So then next, we really need to hone in on what's keeping the leadership team from focusing on really important key initiatives that could take us to the next level. Why are we always firefighting? Why do we not have enough time to do improvement projects, right? So we need to get this off of their plate so that they can focus some management attention on proactive things. So it's very helpful to do this early on. So we're talking about what are the disruptions and distractions, and a lot of those are typically defects, downtime, and delays cause a lot of those, right? So these are some of the tools that can be used during the assessment, as well as many others. But this was a um, pretty long laundry list that I came up with just thinking through it for 10 minutes or so. Um, I'm not going to go through all of this. Many of you are already familiar with tools of Six Sigma and Lean and TOC, but I will send you the slide deck as I have with the others, so you can take a deeper look, closer look at those if you want. All right. So then we move into stabilize. This is stage 2. This is I think this is very important. We could go straight to the bottleneck before dealing with the deterrence, but in my opinion, I would rather contain and decontaminate the things that are our problems before we open up the floodgates and spread the contamination, right? Does that make sense to anyone? So, what are the top 3 deterrents to management attention? We want to prioritize, eliminate those. If we can't eliminate them, we want to minimize and mitigate them. So we're talking about the disruptions, the distractions, the defects, the downtime, and the delays here. We want to start with those that are impacting the constraint first. This helps prevent us achieving a critical mass as we increase the flow because of an unstable system. Okay. We don't want to speed up a process that's producing 10 or 20 or 50% defects, right? So during this process, we're going to have a combination of just do it projects where you just basically follow the plan, do, check, act cycle. We're going to have DMAIC projects, possibly if it's a more complex chronic problem. And we can also make use of Kaizen events to rapidly solve core problems. Okay. And it just depends on how big and nasty the problem actually is, right? So some of the early benefits we'll achieve here is management will have more time for proactive support of key initiatives. So if they're focusing 30, 40, 50, 90% of their time firefighting, guess what? These key initiatives are going to get neglected, and competitors that are actually um, taking on key initiatives will be the ones that move on to the next phase in the economy, while other organizations will be left behind. Okay. So at this phase, we drive much less firefighting, right? We will also achieve better quality, less scrap, less rework, and less overtime, which most of those translate to dollars, right? And when we're not spending time fixing quality issues and dealing with downtime and delays, we're also getting more throughput, right? With the same resources we already have, and less expenses if we have less overtime and less rework and less material scrap, right? So that helps with funding become more readily available for other key initiatives. Okay. So some of the other things that could happen here is as we're getting more throughput, our inventories can come down, our lead times can come down, and our on-time delivery can improve because we didn't scrap it halfway through the process and have to remake it, right? Which not only makes that order potentially late, but also the order that now it's jumping in front of as well. Exactly. So these are some of the tools that you can use during the stabilized phase. Okay. So, gaining an understanding of the process with process maps, flowcharts, having an exploded bill of materials, knowing the routings, having a cause and effect diagram, doing an is not analysis, 5 whys, causal chains, and you can use YY diagrams and fault tree analysis. You may even need to do some data collection, right? So come up with the data collection plan with operational definitions. use check sheets and trend charts, Pareto charts, histograms, stacker graphs, scatter diagrams. One thing I didn't put on here is a spaghetti map or a workflow diagram. Multivariate analysis is a fun one. Design of experiments if it's a really tough problem. And then we use plan, do, check, act, and project management to apply these. And we also need to look at what are the specs, what are the acceptance criteria, the standard operating procedures, the work instructions, checklists, audits, and it's always a good idea when you're trying to solve a problem to go back and look at your corrective action, your corrective and preventive action history, because guess what? 3 years ago, somebody may have already solved this problem and they have not sustained the solution. So don't forget to review that. Another thing that I always like to do is go to purchasing and ask about anything that has been purchased relative to a department. Okay, that can give you additional clues as to something that's going wrong and getting replaced, or we weren't producing defects and then we installed this component and then afterwards we have defects, right? So it gives you clues by looking at the purchasing history as well. Then we have, we can implement our controls to keep the problem from coming back. And we can also apply common TLS solutions and tools. Okay. So a four blocker is a handy tool that can be used for incremental improvement. So let's say we solved some of the problems, but now we're moving on to additional projects, but we want the subject matter experts and the process owners to continue to improve after we move on to our next priority. So the first quadrant shows a trend chart versus a goal, and what are the obstacles and issues that are counter to the goal. So then we've got a Pareto chart with a breakdown of it. This is actually a stacker chart Pareto, so it's cutting it in 2 dimensions. Then we get into what do we think we should be focusing on first so that we can achieve more and have less things blocking us. What do they think is causing it? And what are we going to do about it, by who and by when, to try to eliminate it or at least minimize it. And we use plan, do, we teach them all the problem solving tools as well as plan, do, check, act so that they can do this. And somebody that's well versed in problem solving and continuous improvement might need to lead them for a few weeks, and they'll start showing progress very quickly. And typically they're excited that they're getting attention and they're getting engagement and authorization to make changes. So usually within about a month or so, they can start to do it without the oversight of the continuous improvement professional or expert. Okay. So the next phase is constraint quick hits. This is stage 3. And this is where we start to look for the low-hanging fruit at the constraint. So we identify it. We have many common TLS tools and techniques that can rapidly improve a constraint. So we identify it, we prioritize it, then we harvest it. So you could do this with 1 to 3 Kaizen events and make very rapid improvements at your constraint, which will have an impact on your whole organization if it really is your constraint. Okay, so the early benefits here is you're going to increase throughput for that product family that you're focusing on, as well as any other product families that share that constraint. So this can be a huge impact in your profitability. You're going to have improved on-time delivery, better lead times, less inventory, and better cash flow. And these are some of the tools that you can use. Once again, we've got our data collection tools, and we use prioritization matrices and plan, do, check, act. And some of the common TLS tools and techniques that I've been referring to are 5S, full kit, quick changeovers or SMED, mistake and error proofing, benchmarking to see, how else could we do this process that's, faster, easier, more economical, whatever. we don't necessarily have to invent every solution. We can also do a little homework and apply things, right? So that's where benchmarking comes in. Then we've got standard work. We've got multiple stations or multiple operators or multiple shifts. Who does which step the best, and combine those into a standard process that has all the tips and techniques and shortcuts that are authorized into a standard work methodology, and then train everybody on that, you know. Then we cross train them on their standard work. Now we have potential for line balancing. We can stagger shifts and cover breaks. We can implement drum buffer rope and buffer management. We can do Kanban on the materials and information. We can create work cells. We can track this constraint with the utilization metric that I showed you before, which is OEE plus an additional level of analysis. We can do some design for manufacturability for some running changes that are simple but impactful. And then we need to look at updating. We do our change management here, and then we do our sustainment. Okay. So then we move on to enhancing our flow, where we execute our chain of solutions that we talked about yesterday across additional internal operations. So we've dealt with the top deterrents. We've dealt with, the first 1, 2, or 3 constraints. And so imagine now your operation can handle 20% more throughput, but your other resources are not used to running at 20% more volume. So now we execute our chain of solutions and coordinate our improvements to maximize our results with minimal investment. So we identify and prioritize our obstacles. We identify and prioritize our solutions. We test them and implement them. And then we harvest all of our, or the next 20% or so of our hidden capacity, and translate that into results, which means increased throughput and more profit. Okay, so we're going to do this with a combination of just do it improvements and series of Kaizen events so that we can rapidly improve. And while we're doing this, we're training additional project leaders with experiential learning on the TLS methodologies. I like to train people on our methods and tools just before we actually implement them. And you can do that, give them the training before they identify their obstacles, and then give them additional training before we identify our solutions. And then they can imagine how they could apply that in the environment and the circumstances that they've got. Okay. So that they're basically learning it just before they apply it. Okay, so the benefits here, our processes are more capable, stable, and coordinated throughout the facility. Our throughput for the target product families increased again. So now, we may be at 30 to 40% the volume that we were before. I mean, an increase of 30 or 40%. So how much throughput increase could you get if you improve a process by reducing its time by 20%? Can anybody put an answer in the chat box here? If you reduce the amount of time it takes at an operation by 20%, how much additional throughput can you get? If it's at the constraint. So basically, if you reduce the time by 20% that it takes, you divide by 0.8, right? So 20% time improvement translates to a 25%. If you divide 1 by 0.8, you get 1.25. That means you've increased your throughput capacity by 25% by reducing your cycle time by 20%. Okay. So we've increased our target product family throughput again, as well as the other product families that share the constraints. Okay. We've also continued to improve our on-time delivery, our lead times, our inventory, and our cash flow, right? And these are some of the tools we can use here. So we're using the chain of solutions again, what we talked about yesterday. We're using our stabilized tools that we use to solve problems, and we're using the common TLS tools that we talked about when we discussed on how we could improve the constraint. So in addition, we're using project management, portfolio management, we're using plan, do, check, act, we're using RACI charts to know who's in charge of what, who do they need to coordinate with. We're using critical chain project management. We're using throughput accounting, project charters, communication plans, and strategic reviews of the projects as well as the project portfolio. And we are training people on TLS. Okay. So here's the chain of solutions again. So we know what our processes are. We use cycle time, or, that's one of my favorites, to prioritize where we should focus first. So we know our top 3. We list all of our obstacles and interferences that the subject matter experts have shared with us based on their food waka and their experience. And we measure the value and the waste. Then we identify and rank potential solutions versus our ranked obstacles. Okay. Then we coordinate which ones should we do first to get our first 20% improvement. Then what should we do second? Right? What's phase 2? Then what's phase 3? Okay. And a lot of times I use that 4 blocker for driving phase 3. Okay. Then we move into reassess. This is where we're preparing for rapid internal and value chain partner improvement. So we reevaluate our initial information and assumptions that we did during the first stage, because the constraint will quickly move outside the organization, either to the market or into our value chain and to, the distribution channels or our supply chain, right? So we need to figure out, okay, we just changed things, and what else has changed externally, right? So time has passed, and our improved performance may impact those external factors. So we go back and do our SWOT and pestle analysis, our market analysis, and look at benchmarking info again. We take a deeper analysis into the capabilities and performance of our value chain then. And can the supply chain and distribution and logistics channels handle us continuing to rapidly ramp up? Are there any new deterrents that we need to address and prevent? What's keeping the leadership at this point from focusing on the next level key initiatives? Once again, the disruptions, the distractions, the defects, the downtime, the delays. Okay. So these tools are basically the same that we used during stage 1. And we're going to emphasize more on the value chain capabilities and capacities, though, when we do this round. Okay. So then we strengthen and coordinate for stage 6. Now we're training our internal team and value chain partners with our TLS program at this point. So we're coordinating and executing the chain of solutions with value chain partners and across additional internal operations. We may not have improved every facility in every department by the time we've gotten here. So we're continuing to roll out the training as we need to implement it. Okay, we may give some overview training so that everybody knows what we're doing, but we're giving that next level of training on how to apply it as we're rolling out these projects and improvements. So we're coordinating our improvements again to maximize results with minimum investment. So we're continuing to identify and prioritize our obstacles, likewise identifying and prioritizing our solutions and testing them before we implement them. And then we're harvesting our potential into actual results. So at this point, we have a strategic continuous improvement project portfolio that we're managing. And so we've got a combination of just do it's, incremental improvement. So just do it's, we're using plan, do, check, act within people's normal realm of responsibility and span of control. With incremental improvement, we may have some small subject matter expert teams where they're using 4 blockers. Then we have our um, traditional style Lean Six Sigma DMAIC projects for large initiatives, and a series of Kaizen events that can be coordinated either independently or as a sub part of a larger mega project. Okay. So the benefits here, our processes are continuing to become more capable and stable and reliable, and we're coordinating it throughout additional facilities and departments and throughout our value chain. So our throughput, our reliability, and service levels are continuing to improve. We've got even better quality and better on-time delivery, better lead times, better inventory, and better cash flow. So we should be continuing to increase our market share as this is going on. Okay. So these tools are, the same ones that we used internally, but now we're emphasizing using them with the value chain as well. And we've also bumped up our TLS to just, experts going around and managing projects to actually training other people to do projects as well and drive just do it's and incremental improvements and lead to make projects and Kaizen events. So this means we can have multiple projects going on simultaneously because we have more people trained that can handle them. So we've got increased bandwidth, which is important if you're also helping your value chain. Okay, so let's think about this. Now, where's our next risk? So let's say this is our span of control on our internal organization. And these are our supply chain partners. And these are our logistic and distribution partners. So our internal operations are within our span of control, but these external ones, they're within our sphere of influence. So that's why I say they're our partners. We want to help them because it's in our own best interest. If they can't supply us or they can't get our products or services all the way to the end customers, we can't complete the sales for that proportion of our volume, right? So what we're doing here is strategic improvement projects that are rapidly increasing our throughput. Then we may have to do these strategic projects elsewhere in our value chain during this period while we're doing incremental improvement and just do it internally. So we're still improving, just not as at a fast of rate. Think of this like we've got some mega projects with a series of Kaizen events, and we're just rapidly increasing our throughput. Okay. Then we can go through another phase of it once we've shored up our value chain. Then we need to go back into a continuous improvement mode that's not as rapid while we do another series of strategic rapid improvements with our value chain. Okay. By doing this, we're keeping things more stable. Okay. And then eventually our value chain outperforms the competitors, right? So now we can think of this like we did earlier with a piping diagram and where should we focus in what sequence. So let's say we start internally, okay? Then we have to go to our suppliers over here. Then we have to deal with a supplier, an internal project, as well as a distributor project, okay? Then we go upstream a little further. We're dealing with another supplier or the same supplier, another project, and then now we're dealing with another distribution channel, okay? All right, so then we move into the next level analysis where we review and analyze the strengths of our enhanced value chain. We look at additional desirable markets, which ones are highly profitable, which ones have unmet needs, or they're completely unserved or are underserved, which ones have the competition not performing well, which ones have demand even when there's a market downturn, such as an essential business. And then we prioritize our existing product families because we can increase the contribution margins per unit and demand for additional value by reducing the time and materials required per unit, especially constraint time, right? And we can also enhance the value adding features of them so that they're more desirable. And, we can both gain market share as well as make more dollars per unit. Then we identify those new product families that are within these desirable markets. What can we do that we can produce with our existing resources and capabilities and deliver through our existing value chain? And which ones complement or supplement our existing portfolio? So another thing you can think about is, what are our customers buying that they're not buying from us, but they need it, or they don't even know they need it, right? So we're using the same tools from the assess and reassess phases, but once again, we've got an emphasis on the value chain and the voice of the customer for our current and desired market segments. So then we do a product analysis on the time and materials data. We need to know the exploded bill of materials. We need to know the routings and do capacity and inventory analysis and look at the specs and review the documents for what can we change that the customer will not complain about, as well as be very excited about. Okay. So then we move into redesigning existing products and designing new products that we can offer. So we use Demidov from Six Sigma and lean product development and combine that with critical chain project management to get it done much faster. So we redesign the prioritized existing product families so that we have higher contribution margins and request less time and effort to produce. Then we design the new product families that fit, complement, and supplement our product or service portfolio. And we want to set this up so we can use existing resources and value chain to get more value through it, capitalize on that work that we've done to stabilize and discover hidden capacity, right? So then we set up our production and operations for flexible ramp up as the demand increases. So, these are our fundamental TLS tools again. We've got 5S, full kits, mistake proofing, quick changeovers, work cells, drum buffer rope, buffer management, Kanban. We cross train and have game plans for how do we rebalance our lines and stagger shifts and cover breaks depending on our product mix. And we set up the metrics, specs, acceptance criteria, SOPs, and so on, right? Then we get into launching our marketing plan. So we've got some additional tools here. So we've got the Demidov methodology. We've got QFD, TRIZ, benchmarking, reverse engineering, design for X. So manufacturability, assembly, maintenance, packaging, shipping, etc. Right? We've got a PUG selection matrix where we can analyze which combination of features gives us the best result. We can use design of experiments, multi-environment over stress testing. We can also do simulations with finite element analysis and so on. And we can do lean product development. Oh, looks like I copied that twice, sorry. Then we get into project, program, and portfolio management of, we may have multiple things being designed at once, so we've got to manage that, right? And we can put these on critical chain project management and track them with fever charts. And once again, we use our common TLS tools and solutions for the production setup and start to get set up for the TOC distribution solution and some of the demand-driven institute methodologies. And we develop our marketing strategy and irrefusable offers, okay? So then we get into our scalable growth phase where we develop and execute our growth plan. So this is where we've got solid processes in place. They're reliable and profitable, and we have competitive advantages. We decide where and when we want to expand so that we can maximize our ROI and internal rate of return. And we have very short payback times when we're spending our money now, when we want that additional capacity. So we're deciding when to elevate constraints as demand increases. So we're using throughput accounting to make some of these decisions. We're looking internally. We're looking at our supply chain as well as our distribution and logistics. There's also potential for vertical integration at any point where it makes sense. So now we can drive both organic growth and inorganic growth in parallel. So we're improving our existing processes and gaining capacity and throughput. and we purchase additional capacity with outstanding ROIs. So the tools we're using here, the common TLS tools again, to set up our production, our operations. We're using our TLS program management. Um, we're using chain of solutions for portfolio management. And we're using critical chain project management for projects. Okay. Then we've got our TOC distribution solution in place, and we can also be looking at the demand driven methodology. So you've got DDMRP, demand driven operating model, um, demand driven SNOP and adaptive SNOP, and the overall demand driven adaptive enterprise. Okay. As well as our continuing to hone our marketing strategy and irrefusable offer, and we're using throughput accounting and prioritization matrices for deciding when to elevate capacities and capabilities. So basically, you can imagine any department going from about like this to this and coordinating which ones that we're implementing this on for the most impact across the entire enterprise and the value chain. So we can do stuff like this. Was from a project that took me about 3 months, and we went from 8 units a day with 20% over, or wait, no, 25% overtime to 11 units per day and no more overtime unless it was voluntary because some people had gotten used to it, and the management was making enough money that they still allowed certain people to have some. And this was similarly, we reduced the amount of time that it would take to get through. So at the same facility where we went from 8 to 11 units, then the next phase, we went up to 14 and then 16 units per day, all on one shift. And then they went ahead and started adding some additional things that they could do with their capacity on second and third shift. So they took a cost center in this organization and drove it into a profit center. And it actually became their best facility in the center of excellence that they used for show and tell and training other facilities what good looks like. Okay. So by the time you do this, what you've done here is you've increased profitability, and you've got a program in place to continue to do so. So we're increasing sales and we're decreasing our expenses relative to the sales. Okay. So we've got sales increasing, and for a period we were reducing our overtime, rework, and scrap, and eventually we started to elevate some things and add a few people here or there where we'd be able to continue to increase our throughput. And what that has done to our profit is you can see how big the difference is from here to here, from the green and red here, versus once we have a focused improvement program in place. So once again, the benefits: customer satisfaction, better on-time delivery, lead time and quality, more reliable. The company has more sales, reduced inventory, reduced operating expenses. The employees are more satisfied. They've got a better understanding, more confident. They were engaged in changing and eliminating a lot of the food waka, those things that cause them stress and frustration. And now that the company is more profitable, there's much more probability that they're going to have job security as well as better benefits and increased pay. Okay. So, we assess where we're at. We start having strategic rapid improvement projects. We train more and more people on how to do it. And so this is where we get our change management and training in place to keep from continue to sustain and move on up to the next level. Then we've got strategic improvements throughout the value chain. Then we arrive at best in class, where our value chain is dominant with competitive advantage. So we basically decide what market share we want based on as long as it's relevant to our capabilities and capacities. And so Does anyone have any questions?